this is how we disable toxic masculinity.
We need to kill all men.
This pagan patriarchalism that is coming back out of the shadows.
Feminists hate patriarchy.
It's the woman that runs the show, and the woman that runs the community and is the backbone of that area.
I'm a nasty woman. A loud, vulgar, proud woman.
Patriarchy. You are male privilege.
Are you saying you have authority over me? Go get your superior.
I personally can't see why egalitarianism would be a bad thing.
The assumption that wives should make babies instead of money is part of the patriarchy.
Don't say hi to strange women you don't know.
Patriarchy.
The patriarchy.
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 Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is the slave of sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The son does remain forever. So if the son makes you free, you will be free indeed." And that is John chapter 8, verses 34 to 36. You are on the Fight, Laugh, Feast Network, and you are listening to The Patriarchy. My name is Tony DePani, and I am joined by my co-host, Pastor Joseph Randall Spurgeon.
Now, there are people starting to wake up to this, Tony, and one of the things they're waking up is that the idea of pornography is enslaving people. One of the things pornography does is it takes young men out of the battle. Mm-hmm. It really is enslaving, and it takes you out of the battle. It makes you weak. You remember Samson, the strongest man in all of the Bible. What makes him weak? Women, right? Sexual immorality. His enemies use sexual immorality and women to make him weak. There's a guy named Grayson Quay that says this very helpfully. He says, self-control makes strong men. Self-indulgence makes weak men. Mm-hmm. Strong men make good citizens. Weak men make good slaves. Strong men are capable of doing harm. Weak men are incapable of doing anything else, right? Sexual immorality makes you weak. And one of the ways it makes you weak is by the constant guilt from your sin that you experience. When you're enslaved to pornography and you're watching that and you're in this fight, in this battle, it's like this cycle. And it always like you think, I'm going to fight this, and you give in. And in the middle, you're giving in and you're feeling the pleasure and you're enjoying it. But then as soon as it's over, guilt, and you're at a very low point where like, I'm never doing this again. And while you're in the midst of that battle, always you're not able to actually be engaged in battles, taking the gospel into the world and being free. And instead, that guilt, it makes you shrink back from the battle. Thankfully, there are people that are waking up to at least the idea of pornography. And so, Tony, there was this thing, and I think you said it's happened before, but they called it No Nut November.
Yeah. From what I've read, I think it happens every year. I don't know how long it's been going on, but I remember reading about it in years past.
So it's a little crude, No Nut November, but the idea is that men, and listen, these are not a lot of them are Christians, and they're often operating in their own flesh, trying to fight this. But I am thankful that they are waking up to the idea that this controls them. So the idea is that for the month of November, they're not going to masturbate. They're not going to have sexual relations. And this has happened on Reddit and other websites. And actually, according to one of the moderators of the subreddit, 52,000 people were documenting their day-by-day progress throughout the month of November, this past November.
That's a lot of people.
And so 52,000 people writing this, documenting this, saying we want to be done with pornography. Now, here is the funny thing, and sad, is that Rolling Stone magazine caught on with this, and they wrote an article where they had a clinical psychologist and sex therapist who studies pornography and mental health, named David Lee, a PhD. He refers to this as a creepy little smorgasbord of insecurity-driven hate with anti-Semitism, misogyny, and homophobia all rolled up in one.
What? Wow. Wow.
So if you're not looking at porn, you hate Jews, you hate women, and you're homophobic.
Wait. What was this guy's title again?
A clinical psychologist and sex therapist.
And he's calling people creepy? I mean,
he actually partnered with a cam website called Strip Chat, which is a porn website, to do what they call AMAs on Reddit. It's like a message board where you ask questions. And so he did this AMA where he was trying to debunk the myths associated with No Nut November. So basically he's trying to say, pornography is actually good, right? And so he says the irony, and this Rolling Stone, is that the anti-masturbation movement, while it's ostensibly intended to fight the larger porn industry's attempt to brainwash and emasculate white men, anti-masturbation ideology has historically been used as a tool by fascist figures to gain social control. It's Nazis. You're a Nazi if you don't look at porn. If you do not look at porn, you are a Nazi. Hey, would you play that clip that I have? Actually, people, you can hear him saying it.
Yep, here we go.
Masturbates. Dr. Lay explained that the main proponents of this no wank philosophy were the Proud Boys.
Masturbation is lack of impulse control.
The Proud Boys believe that not masturbating increases their testosterone and makes them more desirable to women, which brings up one question.
Is it working for the Proud Boys?
Research actually finds that less masturbation reduces testosterone.
So there's evidence that masturbating makes you a more masculine man.
A lot of really good things happen in your body and your brain. But also research is finding that people who watch more pornography, they are more feminist, and interestingly, they develop more egalitarian values over time.
And what's funny is, so he's quoting there a study published by the Journal of Sex Research, conducted by the University of Western Ontario, and it compared people who watch porn with people who don't. And what they found out is that if you watched an adult film at least once in the past year, you held more egalitarian ideas about women in positions of power and women working outside the home. That means you want women to work outside the home. You want women to be in power. And also, you have more positive views towards abortion.
Nothing bad could come of that.
So you're telling me it's playing this as good. Like, watching porn makes you an egalitarian. It makes you support abortion. What it does is it makes you a weak man, incapable of leading.
Mm-hmm. That's what they want.
Of course, you're not going to lead a woman, and you're going to want women in power because you're compromised morally. You're morally compromised, and you know you don't have the moral authority to lead. And of course, you want the woman working outside the home so that you don't have to work as hard. You can stay in your parents' basement, jerking off. And of course, you want abortion because if you're by chance lucky enough to find a woman, you can get her pregnant and not have to take any kind of responsibility.
Yep. One thing leads to another in that. Quickly, it leads to another in that.
So porn destroys your masculinity. It's a form of enslavement.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to be on the line with none other than Dr. E. Michael Jones from Culture Wars Magazine. So stick around. You're on the Fight, Laugh, Feast Network, and you are listening to The Patriarchy. We'll be right back. We are on the line with E. Michael Jones. Dr. Jones is an American writer, former professor at St. Mary's College in Indiana, and the current editor of Culture Wars magazine. He has written on topics such as the decline of Western culture, cultural Marxism, as well as the mindsets of modernism, postmodernism, and sexuality. His most recent book, Logos Rising: History of the Ultimate Reality, is available in January. Married to his wife of 50 years, they have 5 children and 18 grandchildren. Dr. Jones, welcome to the Patriarchy.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, Dr. Jones, we do want to thank you for your time to come on our show and being interviewed, and we're excited to have you on. Let me start by giving you a little bit about us, who we are, and then where we hope to go with the interview.
Okay.
So we're a couple of Protestant men. I'm a pastor who saw a need to learn and teach into the sphere of biblical masculinity. And so by Protestant, we don't mean the non-Christian mainline denominations or the squishy, modern, evangelical, big box, kumbaya kind of thing either. So we're confessionally reformed Presbyterians. And just to be clear to you and to our listeners, we do still strongly affirm against the papacy, and we hold tightly to the 5 solas. And so while we don't consider the Roman Catholic Church to be the one holy Catholic Church, we do genuinely hope and pray for their true repentance in the faith. But we do say that to say, welcome to the show. And so from my understanding, you're a settled Roman Catholic, not afraid to take a punch nor throw one. And so, or not afraid to recognize the distinction between your views and ours. So
Right.
To get on topic, we wanted to talk about sexual immorality as control. You know, kind of recently, there was another Roman Catholic, Matt Walsh, wrote an article about banning pornography, received all kinds of this backlash. It's been really crazy. So you wrote a book, Libido Dominati, that traces the idea of sexual immorality as control. And before we kind of dig into that book, you in another book, you had this story about the Israeli army and the Palestinians and porn. Can you kind of just give us that story to kind of set the stage?
Yeah, that was in March of 2002. The Israelis marched into Ramallah, the army, the IDF, and the first thing they did was take over the TV stations, and the second thing they did was start broadcasting pornography. Now, this, I think, is significant because it explains what pornography is. It's not something that just happens. It's a weapon, and it's a weapon to be used against people that you want to subjugate. So if you don't accept that premise, then you're going to have to explain to me why the Israelis wanted to bring liberation to the Palestinian people, because that's the conventional American explanation of what happened here. Now, this is important because it happened in the United States as well. It wasn't as dramatic as that. It wasn't tanks rolling in, but it did happen in the United States over a much longer period of time. So it began in the 1920s when Hollywood started producing films that basically outraged the sensibilities of all Americans. At this point, the Protestants decided to do something about it. They were obviously the dominant group at that point, and they failed. The Hayes Commission failed to rein in Hollywood, and at this point, the Catholics, the other part of America, America is based on 3 ethnic groups that have 3 different religions: Protestant, Catholic, Jew. So the Catholics stepped up to the plate, organized a boycott, and they basically brought Hollywood to its knees, and Hollywood adopted the production code. At that point, the Catholics pretty much ran Hollywood, in a sense that they prohibited ridicule of the clergy, obscenity, nudity, and a lot of other stuff that was kind of irrelevant, but was part of the code. This lasted until 1965, when the Jews who ran Hollywood broke the code with a film called The Pawnbroker, which is basically a Holocaust porn film. Mm-hmm. They used the Holocaust to smuggle bare breasts onto the screen. That broke the code, and the Catholics had lost their nerve at that point. They were crippled by a misunderstanding of the Vatican Council, and so they just let it happen. They closed down the Legion of Decency, which was the enforcement agency, And within 7 years, we had hardcore pornography on first-run theaters. Deep Throat being the big example. The Jews defended this. You can click on YouTube, type in Alan Dershowitz, William F. Buckley, Harry Reams, and there's Alan Dershowitz defending pornography. No one defended pornography up to this point. They would defend a certain film as art and said it had redeeming social value, but there's Alan Dershowitz defending pornography. What happened here is once they were allowed to do this, they had no check. There was no check on these people, and pornography spread like wildfire. It's always driven by technology. So in the initial stage, it was film loops run by a Jew by the name of Reuben Sterman, who owned all of the theaters with film loops. He ended up going to jail. And then it became VHS tapes. It was basically the main reason people bought VCRs was to play pornography, at least at the beginning. And then finally it got onto the Internet. And at that point, the Clinton administration stepped in and basically made the world safe for pornography by passing the misnamed Communications Decency Act, which basically removed any threat of prosecution. So what you had is now a generation of 20-year-olds who have grown up with pornography on their cell phones immediately available, and the result was predictable. It's addiction. People wake up, the young men wake up, and they realize they are addicted to this because it's that type of has that type of power to it. Now, anyone who was familiar with the Christian tradition could have predicted this. St. Augustine said, the rich man, though a king, is a slave. The immoral man, though a king, is a slave. And the poor man, though a slave, is free because a man has as many masters as he has vices. He clearly stated that passion, if it escapes from rational control, will become a master, and the person will become a slave. That's exactly what happened here. Pornography disappeared when Christianity succeeded the Roman Empire. Again, it was a function of technology. So there was pornography in the ancient world. In Pompeii, for example, you would have mosaics, pornographic mosaics, but you had to go into a whorehouse to find them. This changed again with the outbreak of revolution. I'm talking about the French Revolution, and preceding that was pornographic editions, etchings of illustrating the Marquis de Sade's pornographic novel, Justine. So it re-entered history as a weapon. This was weapon used to overthrow the Bourbon monarchy. It was used to suppress the Vendée, the uprising against it. And on top of that, basically the Marquis de Sade came up with the philosophy of what we're talking about here. And so, if you want to, he says basically the moral man is at rest, but the immoral man is in constant motion. Well, if you're interested in motion, if you're interested in revolution, you're interested in motion. And so once again, this got weaponized. The pornography, the subversion of morals, the presentation of these images was put to political purpose. In the 1930s, sexual misbehavior was masturbation in particular was put as a weapon, proposed as a weapon by Wilhelm Reich in his Psychology of Mass Fascism. And finally, they came together, and now we've had a period of unprecedented oligarchic control over our economy, so that 20-year-olds are basically in debt. And what has happened in this period of time, let's say from the Paul Volcker Fed up to the present, is usury has concentrated wealth into fewer and fewer hands, and these people have used that money to basically promote sexual liberation, to distract people from the fact that they're poorer than their parents were. And so this generation, 20-year-olds, wakes up and they realize, I got unrepayable student loan debt, and I've got pornography on my phone, and the pornography is here to distract me from my student loan debt, and I'm not taking it anymore. And so last month, to bring things up to date, a group of people young men organized a boycott of pornography and a boycott of masturbation. This immediately caught the eyes of the cultural, the oligarchs and their instruments of control. And so Rolling Stone wrote an article condemning these people and calling them anti-Semites because they're not watching pornography. So that's pretty much where we stand today. That was the pretty much the whole trajectory of how this came about.
Wow.
Great. You have actually, I have several questions written down, and you just kind of walked all the way through them.
We're checking them all off as we go here.
But let's kind of go back a little bit. You were talking about the Marquis and the French, and in your book, it kind of starts off with the Illuminati, and we think of them mainly through the big giant conspiracy theory. But you said something about they took the idea of Christian confession and were able to flip that in a way of control. Can you kind of tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah, well, there was a group called the Illuminati. It was the leader was a man by the name of Adam Weishaupt. He was a professor of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt. He was also, by the way, probably the model for Frankenstein, because Mary Shelley read Barrowell's memoirs, that's where they found out. That's where she found out about this. But he was. This was a university was run by the Jesuits, and the Jesuits had examination of conscience, which is a prelude to going to confession, sacramental confession. So you go through the Ten Commandments, and you find out what your faults are, and then you discuss them with your spiritual advisor, and then you go to confession. And the priest who hears your confession tells you, these are your sins. Now your sins have been absolved. Now go and sin no more. So if you want to be free, you have to confess your sins. But he turned it upside down. Revolution is always turning something upside down. And so what you do, instead of freeing the person by absolving him from sin and saying, go and sin no more, you control the person by finding out what the sins are and then promoting the vices. And then you can become the man's controller, and this becomes a way of controlling groups of people. And that's how it got started with the Illuminati. And one of the other people who read the same memoir, Barrowell's memoir about the French Revolution, was Sigmund Freud. And so Sigmund Freud proposed his form of control, which was basically a parody of the confessional. So you lie down on the couch and you tell Freud you start talking about your problems, and you very get involved in talking about your sins because they're the cause of your problems. So one of an American doctor who wanted to become a psychiatrist laid down on the couch, and in the course of his psychoanalysis, he said he was having sex with one of his patients, a wealthy woman. Instead of Freud saying, well, that's a bad thing, you should stop doing that and go and sin no more, he says, no, divorce your wife, marry this woman, and then make a big contribution to the Psychoanalytic Association. So once again, we see this as, this is traditional spiritual practice turned upside down, turned into a form of control through which Sigmund Freud could bilk rich Americans of their money in exchange for some type of rationalization of what they were doing.
Now we think it's interesting as we think of psychology, and we think of, like, for instance, now how like sodomy and homosexuality used to be considered a mental disorder, and we think of it recently being taken over, and now it's just now being distorted. But what you're saying is really from the beginning, it was always about control and giving over to vice.
You're referring to psychology now?
Yeah. You think about the American Psychology Association and how at one point in time they declared homosexuality and transgender to be mental disorders, but now they've changed on that. And so we think of that being this kind of a recent takeover of that and a distortion of something that was good. And it seems to be that you're saying even from the very beginning with people like Freud.
Oh, yeah, it goes way back. I mean, libido dominandi is, among other things, it's a history of psychology as well. And all three branches, the behaviorism, Freudianism, and the third way, the Carl Rogers stuff, they're all forms of control. They just go about it in a different way. And so I the American Psychological Association, in its DSM, had homosexuality as a mental disorder. Well, I'm not sure it was. I think it's a vice that can lead to mental disorder, but I think that they tried to erase the moral element by just claiming that it was a mental disorder. And then in the 70s, a group of Jews just decided they were going to get rid of that too. So they changed it in the 70s. I cover that in a book called How Meyer Lansky Took Over the Cincinnati Ballet, because it had direct relevance to that story. But it's a moral disorder, and moral disorders, if morality is practical reason. So if you consistently violate the tenets of practical reason, you'll lose your reason and you'll become insane. But they're two different things, and I think they try to collapse it into one thing, and then they try to absolve it. If it's a mental illness and they're the controllers of who determines what it is, then they erase that, and that's what they did.
So currently in the United States, we have a birth rate that's at an all-time low, but I also was reading the other day that single women, I think we top the entire world in single women in the United States. So how does sexual immorality lead us to a point where we have most women wanting to just be single, no births happening, and you even have this, as you know, this movement called Men Going Their Own Way, where men are just kind of leaving marriage. They don't want to get married anymore.
Right. Yes. This pornography leads to isolation, the sense of isolation, and you acquire all kinds of bad habits here. And you become basically an unpleasant person to be with, and so you go out and you look for someone, and you find out that person's unpleasant too, and you have one bad experience after the other, and then you just give up. It happens with both sexes, so it's not surprising because at this point in your life, when you're in your 20s, the main thing you have to do is find someone else to share your life with, to get married. And the main thing blocking that is the isolation that pornography creates, for a lot of reasons. You know, I mean, for one reason, it gives you a completely unrealistic understanding of what sexuality is. Sin is an isolating factor, and as a result, the bond is not there. It's not being formed. People are not being formed. They're not joining together to make that lifelong bond, and that's a serious problem. And the only way to deal with it is to eliminate pornography. And it doesn't look as if the law is not going to do it. You have to eliminate it personally from your life, and you have to find other people who have done similar things so that you can make that connection.
Do you think this has anything to do with, so we have this, we actually talked about in another episode, we kind of have this weird subsection of men or males in the United States where there's like this area in between boyhood and manhood, and we called it guy land. It was actually from a book. And you see these guys that they're content playing video games, they never want to finish anything, they live in their mom's basement, they don't want to move out, they don't really want to find a wife. They don't want to work with their hands. They maybe go to college, and if they get a degree, it's some odd gender studies thing or something. Do you see any connection between sexual immorality or pornography in general with men leading to this laziness, leading to this not wanting to achieve anything?
Of course. What do you think they're doing in their mother's basement?
This is true.
Yeah.
Of course it is. I mean, there's a direct causal connection here.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're doing here is rendering a whole generation docile. You're creating a docile generation so that they don't organize and say default on their student loan debt or something like that, or rise up and burn down buildings. But you're making them useless as well. And so you're having you're paying this tremendous economic price in turning people into just docile slaves of their own passions. It's horrendous. It's necessary. So when I was at Occupy Wall Street, those were the people who were there. It was all 20-year-olds, and they all held little cards and said, "I'm $50,000 in debt, student loan debt, and all I can get is an unpaid internship.
Yeah.
And they feel there's something. Debt really creates a sense of hopelessness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that these people are shrewd enough, the oligarchs are shrewd enough to say, when you fall into this, we'll give you something to distract you from your consciousness of your debt, and it's pornography. Mm-hmm. This is two sides of the same coin. Over this period from the 78, let's say, up to the present, you've got an increase of money taken out of the economy through compound interest being concentrated into fewer hands, and then these people reinvesting it in the economy as a form of control by promoting the homosexual movement, pornography, feminism, all of these forms of sexual liberation. They're all forms of control. And that's to keep everyone docile and either working hard and paying off their debts and doing nothing else.
But it seems to me the problem then with that, if you're trying to be the one in control, you end up going too far, and you've created a huge mess. So what's the end goal in that there for them? How do they get around? What's the idea now? What's next? You're destroying the West. You've got to fix it somehow.
Yes, the next thing is hate speech. So what you're seeing is the people wake up to their situation, they start talking about it, and then the groups like the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, they don't like it, and so they impose hate speech on the internet or political correctness on campus to keep people from articulating what's bothering them. This is a recipe for violence, but they are determined to maintain their control over the culture, even as they're losing control of the narrative. So they lose control of the narrative. There are people who say, no, this is a better way. They're talking about it on YouTube, and then they say, no, we're going to ban you for saying things that you shouldn't be saying. We're going to, call you, names and so on and so forth.
All right, so final question here for you then to drive this home. So what's the answer for us then? What do you think is the answer for this today? What's the response?
The answer is to get rational control of your life and understand that Logos is the fundamental principle of the universe. And if you're aligned with that Logos, then you will have a happy life. You will have a successful life. The first manifestation of Logos is practical reason. And practical reason is another word for morality. So you have to follow the moral law, which means you put your passions under rational control. Now, that's easier said than done, isn't it? Okay, because people can derive all kinds of bad habits from this. So we have an advantage here because we know that the Logos is not just an abstract principle, it's a living person. It's the second person of the Blessed Trinity. It's Jesus Christ. And that he came down from heaven to redeem us, which means that you can derive power from Jesus Christ that will help you overcome these vices. That's the good news. That's the good news of the gospel.
All right. Well, we would, I think we agree with much there. I would love to add in, as part of that, Jesus declares us righteous in his righteousness. And, right. And that's what enables us then being declared righteous by his righteousness, an imputed righteousness, then gives us a way to become what we've been declared. We're walking out what he's done for us in our lives. So
yeah, I would say that the sacramental system of the Catholic Church is the source of grace, the grace that will change your life, beginning with baptism and then all the other the whole 7 sacraments. But we're talking about Jesus Christ as the Logos, as the hope of the world, and a return to Logos is what we need right now.
Well, Dr. Jones, thank you for coming on. This was great. We're actually really looking forward to this for quite a while. If somebody's listening and they wanted to maybe get in contact with you or read something you've written or maybe visit your website, can you tell our listeners where they could find you or how they could find your books?
Yes, go to culturewars.com. All my books are available, the links to the videos, and so on and so forth. You'll find everything you need at culturewars.com.
Well, again, thank you so much for spending your time with us tonight, and thank you for this interview. This was great. I was really enjoying listening to everything you were talking about, and I think most of our listeners will really enjoy it too.
Good. The pleasure was all mine.
That was Dr. E. Michael Jones, Culture Wars Magazine. You are listening to The Patriarchy on the Fight Laugh Feast Network. We'll be right back.